Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 106. Let me begin by dedicating this episode in honor of Frede Bas Dveira Shifra, Menachem Mendel HaKoyen Ben Frede, Chaye Mushke Bas Frede, for health, happiness, and success in their shlichus. And Le'ilin Nishmas Rabbi Yeshua Zalig Ben Rab Moshe Zalman, whose yortzeit is on Chai Adar. As is customary, we'll begin with the time in which we are in, which is Shabbos Mevorachim. We just benched Chedesh Adar Sheni, second Adar in this Shana Muberes, in this leap year, and we're also going to be reading Parsha Pekudei. This year, because of the Shana Muberes, because it's a leap year, the extra few weeks, so Vayakel and Pekudei, the chapters are separate. Last week I discussed the theme that the Rebbe addressed in the last Vayakel La'esata that we heard the Rebbe speak in Tofshin Nun Beis, which is 24 years ago. Vayakel as being the power of synergy, the power of Kehillah, the power of Achdus, the power of a community, especially in this year of Hakel, so that's even more underscored. In the same vein, Parsha Pekudei is now also separate. The last parsha in the book of Shmos, Sefer Shmos. And the theme of this parsha is, as the Rebbe emphasizes often, is the exact opposite. Pekudei means to count. To count, you have to count every individual item. Moshe Rabbeinu was giving an accounting for after the building of the Mishkan, for all the materials that were donated by the Jewish people. Vayikhu Truma, the 12, 15 different materials that Moshe Rabbeinu gathered from them, Kesav, Zav, Necheshes, gold, silver, gold, copper, and the other materials that we read about. So now he's giving an accounting how it was all used and exactly what it was used for, Pekudei. And to do an accounting means, by definition, details. Just to give a general total is not a true accounting. As an aside, I should mention, I remember when we first incorporated Hanochos responsible for publishing the Rebbe Sichos in the year, it was 1982, but when we bought computers, we got our first big donation and we wrote to the Rebbe about it, and we had all exchange with the Rebbe. It was the first computers in Lubavitch. It was before the PC. It was what some people called Commodore was one of the first computers. We got what's called a North Star. It was all built into one machine. I still actually have it. Some people say it has more chassidus than many people have inside of them. One of these green screens with a keyboard built into it, all one big piece. So we wrote to the Rebbe about it, and one of the things the Rebbe wrote back, besides asking us a few questions about the computers, which is for another time, the Rebbe said that since now that you got this donation, which was a substantial donation relatively speaking, that Kiyadua, and this was the week of Parsha Pekudei, Kiyadua, that you should have a Vad Kaspi, a financial board, Va'aleim Vad Bikeris, an auditing board. Kiyadua Shitose B'kol Mezdis. This is my shit in all the organizations. And then the Rebbe wrote, Bli Neder, Kfi Sheyeduber, or Kfi She'Bisvadis Kedesh Haba Aleinu L'Teva, and Parsha Pekudei, the Rebbe actually spoke about it and asked why Moshe Rabbeinu had to give an accounting. He was a Reya Nemon, right? He was a Reya Nemon, trustworthy completely. Why do you have to give an accounting? The Rebbe said for two reasons. Number one, first of all, it's not his money. It's not his property. So he has to simply not mitzad the issue of accountability and trust or not trust, but simply that's the right thing to do. You gathered money from people, give them an accounting, how it was used. And secondly, being that you're dealing with money and it's not something that is yours, even Moshe Rabbeinu, no one's above accountability in the sense everybody could be in the gay badava, can somewhat, obviously very subtle when it comes to Moshe Rabbeinu. That's what the Rebbe said. And halavai, all the mezuzah should follow the guidelines. That's an aside. But getting back to the theme of Pekudei, of details, so if Vayakel is the focus on the synergy, this week the focus is on the individual. And as we know, it's not a contradiction. That's why these two parshas come together. But this year, there's a focus. Each week has its so-called emphasis. As the Rebbe often says, asks the question, why when you learn the Maimorim of Pesach, you learn how Pesach is the highest holiday. The Maimorim of Shavuos, how Shavuos is the highest holiday. The Maimorim of Sukkot, Sukkot is the greatest holiday. The Rebbe explains it with the concept of a shar, of a gate. Mitzvah, you're supposed to do all the mitzvahs, but everyone has theirs. You have your mitzvah, your Torah that corresponds to your neshama. That doesn't mean you absolve, God forbid, from the rest. But this is the shar, this is the gate. This is the so-called channel through which all your mitzvahs travel through. So the same thing is, Vayakal Pekudei, when you have them separately, each week has its power. In a way, it emphasizes each theme in its own particular way. The theme of Yaakov, synergy, and the theme of Pekudei, individuality. Judaism did not come to annihilate individuality. The fact that we were created different, ein deas ein shavos, our minds are different. Ein partzufei ein shavos, our faces are different. And obviously our personalities are different, is precisely the way God wanted it to be. It's all b'cheis meshel adam harishon, as the Mishnah says in Sanhedrin. It's all in the stamp, so-called. We're all created in the image of the divine image and our children of Adam and Chava. But each has our own particular flavor, our own particular nuance, shade, color, hue, our own particular song. And to, God forbid, not live up to your individuality is you're not using your individual strengths in fulfilling the mission that you and only you were given to fulfill. That's the emphasis of Pekudei. And when you do that and you gather together Vayakab with others, then the synergy is far greater. But the focus now is on the Imenanili Mili, the first half of Hillel's statement. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? Then comes the second half. If I'm only for myself, what am I? But you need to have that individuality. It's a big question that many people have, seeing religion, Judaism, as being conformist oriented. Al tifresh min hatzibur, which is taken to mean don't separate yourself from the community and conform. I would say that conformity is antithetical to everything that God wants. Obviously, al tifresh min hatzibur means that you should not stand out and go against the grain, so to speak. But not in any way does that mean that you have to become a conformist and suppress your personality and your identity. It means you shouldn't, like the Rasha says by the Seder, what is this Aveda? Your Aveda. Taking himself out of the picture. That not. But in the picture, each of us has an individual role to play. In addition to our commonalities, and obviously sometimes we need to forego our own interests and our own comforts for the greater good, but never annihilating the individuality, as is emphasized by the fact, as the Medrash says, that when the Jews stood at Mount Torah, interestingly, there were millions of Jews there. So you would think everything should have been said in Hebrew in the plural. When you say to an individual, you say lacha or lach to a woman. To a group, you say lachem. So but how does the Aseres HaDibros go? Anochi Hashem alekecha, not alekechem. Lo signevu, don't steal would be to a group. Lo signev. Kabed es avicha ve'esimecha. Why? If they're speaking to a group of people, why is the verse focusing Lashon Yachid, the singular, as if only one person was there? And the Medrash answers fascinatingly, because each person heard the Torah as if no one else was there, as the Eibishter was speaking directly to him or her. That's the lesson. Torah was so personal, so relevant. The focus on the individual, the tailoring and the customizing of the idea. This does not mean that Torah follows the whims of human beings, God forbid. It means this universal Torah, this Torah that is given by God, Hashem Echad, and Torah Achas, on the contrary, its unity and the power of its unity is the mere fact that it could be manifest in so many infinite different ways. As the Torah Chaim, the Alt Mittler Rebbe says, that Adar, Achdus Apshuta doesn't mean one and not many. Obviously, it's one God, but the oneness is pshuta, it's so seamless that it manifests in infinite possibilities. So the same divine unity expresses itself in infinite possibilities, in infinite ways, which is the infinite possibilities of each one of us as human beings. The Gemara in Bracha says that Haraya Uchlasa, you make a bracha, when you see Uchlasa is 600,000 people at one shot, you make a blessing, Baruch Chacham Harazim. Blessed is the wise one of the secrets. Why? Because most of us, we have friends, we have 2 or 3 types of friends, people like ourselves or similar to ourselves. Most people don't hang around with people that they don't relate to or don't get along with or have very different mindsets. But someone who sees an uchlasa, which is like Moshe Rabbeinu, a Rebbe, a Nasi, means he can sevel, he can contain, I should say, more than tolerate, contain 600,000 different opinions. That is a chacham arazim, a wise person of secrets. Most of us, as I said, cannot bear or contain just a few types. Some can't even contain anything besides themselves. So chacham arazim is the understanding, appreciation of the individuality, which is, of course, the key to real Chassidus, learning Chassidus, that though it's one doctrine and one text, as the Alter Rebbe says, is the eitzes and Tanya to each individual. How the Alter Rebbe was able to manifest that? That's a Rebbe. He's able to take the eitzes and put them in words that people can apply that same universal point, universal meaning, a point that others can apply the same words in a different way. That's the power of truth. And that's the power of davening. The same question is asked, why do we have to all say the same words in davening? Aveda shebelev, zuit tefillah, service of the heart. Speak to God, to your Father, from your heart. Why do you have to follow the same words others say? Everyone has to say the same Shema, same Baruch Shamar, same Shema Nesra. Mele, learning Torah, that's doctrine, that's laws, that's the Torah is the mind of God. There, it's not up to your emotional feelings. So we all learn the same Torah. We learn what God wants us to do. Obviously, we have to apply it to ourselves personally. But the message is the message. Same 613 mitzvahs. But when it comes to tefillah, it's emotional. An emotional thing, by definition, is subjective. So this is a common question that's asked. And that seems to feed the stereotype that Judaism, again, is a conformist. Everybody's saying the same words. You come to the same minyan, everyone's saying the same words, and so on. No. David HaMelech, which a big part of tefillah comes from Tehillim, especially Psukah de Zimra. David HaMelech asked the Eibishter, he asked the Eibishter that he's asking him a bracha, that the Eibishter should tell that these words that I've said to you should become the words that every Jew says in his davening. And the Eibishter considered that, and it became our words. So the words of tefillah are divine inspired words that give us a language to express our individuality. And that's why kavanah is such an important part. What does that mean? So even though we say the same Shema, but every time you say it, you're supposed to say it with a different kavanah, different way, the meaning of Shema, echad, have different manifestations. If you say it the same way all the time, this is the same words, but it's like music. Music, you play with a different intention if you're a true musician every time. It sounds differently. The song may sound exactly alike, but the passion, the feelings, the sentiment invested in it is different. And tefillah, b'loi kavanah, is keguf b'loi neshama, like a body without a soul, like music that sounds dead. So echad is unity in your life. Every day we have different struggles with unity. I'm fragmented, I have struggles, conflicts within myself, within others, and so on. So when you truly apply the prayer, the davening belev, here's a language that is helping you to express yourself properly, like a shortcut. At the same time, there are parts in davening where we are allowed to add our own words, and even words that are not necessarily in Hebrew. I think enough said about this, but this is all focusing on the Pekudei, the individuality that each of us has and how sacred it is in the eyes of Hashem, the individuality. And obviously, together with Vayakel, you have the full picture of both the synergy and the individuality. Connected to Simcha, Simcha, joy, which is the month, Mishanichnas Adar Marben B'Simcha, the first Adar, now we're entering the second Adar. And the Rebbe explains, Mailan B'Kedesh, it only increases in joy. Is joy a individual experience or a communal experience? On one hand, Simcha Kreis, and Simcha Kreis, meaning you can't have Simcha alone. The Rambam Paskins, Achnosa Sarchim, the main mitzvah of inviting guests is on Yom Tov, more than Shabbos. Some say also on Shabbos, because Shabbos has Simcha. Why? Because Simcha you can't do alone. Einig Shabbos, Karosel Shabbos Einig, pleasure is a internal thing, as Chassidus explains, and you could do it alone. It's actually a solitary, a very internal type of experience. Simcha is celebration. As he explains in Samach Tasamach Nun Zayin, Tofresh Nun Zayin, the Maimer the Rebbe Rashab said, the long Maimer, the wedding of the Frierdiker Rebbe, Simcha is with others. That's why you invite guests. That's why when you have a Simcha, you invite people. You can't celebrate yourself. Of course you could celebrate yourself, but it's not complete. It's not a real celebration. Celebration is one that is with others. But at the same time, interestingly, even though you celebrate with others, your Simcha is still your Simcha. The others enhance it. It's part of the expression. It's the part of how you share. But at the end of the day, it's also a very individual experience. And because the simcha means it's a hergish belev, it's a feeling within your spirit and soul, the idea of simcha, eim habonim smecha bina, as he explains in Samach to Samach. And bina is a personal, your bina, is not someone else's bina. So we can celebrate with others, and they can help us celebrate, and our simcha becomes greater, but it's both an individual and a communal thing. Similar to the Rebbe's explanations when he talks about Yochid and Tzibur. There is Karbonis Yochid, there's a Karbonis Tzibur, and Korban Pesach has elements that's both an individual experience and a communal experience. We'll discuss that more when we get closer to Pesach. Let's move into a new topic. Though we've talked about the topic of women and their role and Torah's view on women in episodes 11, 48, and 75, however, a few new questions have come in, and controversial ones, and touch upon a topic that is very popular, I can say, and controversial and very timely, based on the times in which we live. We talk about women's rights and women's equality and so on and so forth, and how the Torah looks at it. So, in the current climate of women fighting for equal rights, and a long history of male-dominated hierarchies and patriarchal societies, what is the Torah's view on the subject? There are numerous references in Torah that seem to suggest that women are not equal to men. How do we explain expressions like noshim, daaton, kala? Which literally means, this person translates, women's minds are feeble or weak. Daaton, kala. And that they are even considered like property. And how do we reconcile this with the Rebbe's extraordinary empowerment of women today, insisting that they be learned and serve as equal partners with their husbands as shluchim and leaders of their respective communities? Another questioner asked, and we've gathered a few questions of in the same genre, the same vein. Noshan daitis kalas alein, is the expression noshan daitis kalas alein a contradiction to moyach shalit al halev, which means saying that women have weaker, or the way it's defined here, weaker. That's not the translation, as we shall soon see, but at least the way some translated it. Is that a contradiction to the idea of self-control, of the mind controlling the heart? Meaning if women are weak in their minds, so they have less control over their emotions and their subjectivity. The other questions go into the area of property. Why are we saying that women are sometimes considered like spoils of war, or they can be considered as property of their husbands? If I know Torah is emes, but how are we meant to understand the discussion, the Tanakh, Gemara, and even Tanya, which refer to women in sometimes negative ways? Okay. And obviously this feeds into many other questions of the same, as I said, genre, same area, but I'll begin more specifically with this particular topic. I happen to find it the Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence, because this is a topic that bothered me many years ago, and I was wondering what exactly does the Talmud mean with daaton kala. So I did some research at the time. I'd like to share with you. Like anything in Torah, sometimes on the surface level it may appear one way, and when you start looking into it, it ends up having a very different story, sometimes even very different and opposite of what you initially thought. And this is one of the cases. But let's begin with the most basic and fundamental question of all. And that's always the best way to answer questions. Not to answer a question with another question, but means going to the root of the issue. Because often questions are on the middle of a conversation. They're already in the middle of, based on certain axioms and based on certain assumptions, which may or may not be right. So the real question has to go back to the root of it all, from a Torah point of view. I'm not getting now into evolutionary theory, the secular social theory, or other things. From a Torah point of view, we all, the first time that a woman and a man are mentioned in the Torah, we all know where that is. Right in the beginning of Bereshis. The Eibishter says he wants to create a human being in God's image. Nas Adam kid salmenu kid musenu. And he goes ahead, and that's what he does. Zachar nekeva bara esam b'tselem elikim. First time male and female are mentioned. And first times are critical, because that's where you first get to what exactly did God do. Now, it's very clear, without any commentary, that male and female are created in the divine image. So just based on that, is it possible to say that something created in the divine image is inferior? The word doesn't fit. If it says Zachar bara Esai, or bara, however the word would be, and later you start hearing about a woman being taken from the man or however she's created. No. But it says clearly, the same verse, Tzelem Elokim Zachar Nekeva. However you explain it, all the commentators, you can't change that verse. And it's consistent, that's exactly the story. So you're talking about a divine image. Now, every creature on earth was created by the divine. Who else created? God created everything. Heaven and earth, the firmaments, vegetation, the vegetable world, the animal world, and then the human. But there's something unique about the human, Tzelem Elokim. And here is not the place to go into what the meaning is, but whatever it means, it is the image of God, the divine. And it's male and female dafka. And then when God separates them, it's their coming together that creates the full Tzelem Elokim. That's very clear, with all the various explanations. So then all the commentaries, all the sages, all the Chazal, and all the commentaries can't contradict a beferish verse, not only Stama verse, the first verse that mentions male and female. This is a critical way of approaching any idea. You have to go to the root and understand from a Torah point of view. The Torah can't contradict that statement. So to come and suddenly say, noshim, daaton, so what, the Tzelem Elokim has a weak daas? What does it mean? So obviously, these Chazal and different ones, which I shall mention in a few moments, all come to augment and to explain what is the Tzelem Elokim and what is the separation. Why is the separation? And why taka male and female? Why didn't God just create one androgynous creature, one creature, and that's it? Not androgynous, not male and female. Should have been either male or only female, or a creature that's neither male or female. What is this male and female? So here you already need explanation, you need commentary, and especially Kabbalah and Chassidus. That basically the divine manifests in two forms of energy. We'll call it masculine energy and feminine energy. And long before it manifests in a physical, biological sense of a man and a woman as we know it, anyone knows Chassidus knows it's nostalgia, it evolves from higher spiritual levels. To the point that even in the God divine dimension, there's a masculine element of the divine called Kutchabrichu. And there's a feminine dimension called Shchinte. Or in the language Zoh and Malchus. If you go even higher, Mashpia Mekabel. You go even higher, it could be Eir and Keli. All the way in the root, it could be Eir Legalis Luzalose, an energy that expressive energy, and you can say intimate, internal energy, which evolves into Kvuda Basmelech Pnima, an internal type of energy, an intimate type of energy, and Ish Darke Lichbesh, a masculine type of energy, which is go-getter, the aggressive. And you need both dimensions in existence. You need Zoh and Malchus. You need a sun and a moon. And each have their strengths, and each have their weaknesses. Not in the divine dimensions, as they evolve to lower worlds, each has, and they complement each other. So the male-female together, Eish, as the Gemara says, Ish, and Isha, is a fire, and it has the Yud K within it, the Yud and Ish, and the Hey and Isha. Then they become one large fire with the name of God, and they complement each other, and they create that one full divine image. Take away that divine, yes, then they are on their own, and they're not connected. They don't unite as one. You could have clashes between them, and you could have clashes in existence. It's the classic clash between Eris and Kalim, between Zoh and Malchus, between Midas and implementation, all the different elements. So together they are complete. And hence, there's no such thing as superior and inferior. That should be cut out of the whole lexicon. It doesn't apply. We're not talking about how human beings interpret it or how human beings act on it. The fact that there are male hierarchies out there, that's man-made institutions. And has it seeped into Jewish institutions? Unfortunately, yes. But it has nothing to do with Torah. Torah says it clearly. That's all that matters. Then human beings can distort and do whatever they do. Even later when it says, where it says, that's part of the punishment and part of the consequences of eating from the tree of knowledge, which is another discussion, not for here. But the bottom line is, and if you want more on this, you could look in the chapter Women and Men in Torah Meaningful Life, where I encapsulate the essential approach from the Rebbe Chassidus on this topic. But I want to focus back on the issue of what we're talking here, daaton, kalos, and that, daaton, kala, and so on. So number one is that there's no such thing as superior and inferior. Now, once you get down to it, okay, let's try to understand what does the masculine archetype look like, and what does the feminine archetype look like? That's the question. And that's where the Torah and its commentaries, and the Torah Shebiksav, and Torah Shebal Peh, and the Meforshim, and especially Kabbalah and Chassidus, come to illuminate the actual archetype of masculine and feminine. And obviously they both complement each other, or else they wouldn't need each other, or else they'd be the divine on their own. They become v'hayu lebasar echad, to recreate that unity of the Tzelem Elokim. And that's why you have Memorah Chazal that talk about each one's role. Each one's role to live up to the divine image, that part of the divine image that they have to fulfill. So now, with that context, let's now go to the actual Memorah Chazal. And as you look into it, you'll see immediately what the Chazal is trying to say. So yes, there's a Memorah Chazal, noshim daaton kala. There's two places particularly that talk about it. One is in Gemara and Shabbos Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis, and the second is Gemara in Kedushin Daf Pei Lamed Beis. I'll give you the context in a moment. There's also a Memorah Chazal, once you're talking about it, Bina Yeseda Nitna Be'isha, Yesen Me Be'ish. A woman is given more Bina than a man. So they can't contradict each other. And if you're going to bring one, you cannot ignore the other. So what does this mean? Her Bina, she's stronger than the Ish. And in Das, Kala. What does Kala mean also? So people type Kala weak, feeble. It's not correct. Kala literally means light. And as you'll see in a moment, there's B'diuk that is that word, and not other words. There's a word Cholosh. There's other words that could have been used. In Bina Yesed, you could say Daito Cheseda, Daito Ktsara. No, that's an expression, Daito Ktsara. Daito Kala, what does that mean? So let's start first with the Nigla. Pashan and Gemara. So this is, as I said, it's mentioned twice. One in the case of Rashbi, when the Romans heard what he had said about them in a derogatory way, they were looking to arrest him and his son Elazar. And that's what Rashbi said. Noshim daaton kala. He's concerned that if they come to his wife, that torture her and pressure her, and because daaton kala, because her daas is light, she will tell and she will inform where they are. That's one place. The second place is in the laws of Yichud, in Shabbos, as I said, Daf Pei Amud Beis, 80b, and talks about the Yichud, different laws about 2 women with a man, 2 men with a woman. 2 women with a man is considered Yichud because noshim daaton kala. Okay. Now, when you think about it, what does this mean? What is the noshim daaton kala? It means that when it comes to das, what is das? Das is hiskashrus, as he says in Tanya, in Pekudei Gimel. Hiskashrus, from the word hiskashrus, to connect yourself. A very deep focus on the idea that you're studying, to the point that it comes down to even a hargosha. His kashrus and hargosha, like he explains in a number of places, I'll cite them soon from Chassidus. Right. So in that context, a woman is a woman is light, it means that her iskashrus is not as strong as a man's iskashrus. Even though it doesn't say, Bin Yised Nitnam, it compares it to a man. In the case of Das, it doesn't compare, it just says it's light. So what does this word light mean? Well, there's another Gemara that I want to refer you to. An interesting Gemara that is in, let's see, where is the Gemara? In Psachim Peiches Beis. So there it talks about bringing 2, if someone brings 2, designates 2 Psachim, 2 Korbanos Pesach, the Paschal Lamb, you're not supposed to prepare 2. Every family is supposed to prepare 1. So there's a question there, a king and a queen send their servants to go bring the Paschal Lamb. They brought 2. So the king said, go ask the queen what to do. And the queen said, go ask Rabban Gamliel. And Rabban Gamliel said the following words. Because the Melech HaMalka daaton kala, that's what he says there, they don't mind if the Korban Pesach will be either a kid or a lamb. Therefore, it's fine. But for the rest of us, it's not fine because you have to bring only 1 Korban Pesach, only 1 Pesach, 1 designated Pesach. Daaton kala, as Rashi says, because they don't care. So daaton kala means that her commitment to this idea is not so locked in. And that's why it's easy for her to change her position from one to another. Which is why those Gemaras say daaton kala. So it's not necessarily a derogatory statement. It is not a derogatory statement. It's telling us the truth about how a woman's mind works. And as a matter of fact, you can say it's actually a MyLife. It means she's not that locked in. It's easier for her to be flexible. Which comes to the idea that many people fully understand that women are better multitaskers. A man, he's focused on something very hard to give him other things to do. The Gemara in Sanhedrin actually says, Chavav Amud Aleph, that it's more tzad, it's more painful for a man when you move from one house to the next, from one place to another. It's more painful for a man than for a woman, because once he's in a place, it's hard for him to adjust. And a woman has that flexibility. So on one hand, Daita Kala is true. There's sometimes you need daas, you need that concentration. And that's why there's the second half of the Tzelem Elikim. But there's another side where, on the contrary, too much investment in that type of daas can also sometimes be a chsar. So therefore the Etzem statement doesn't necessarily mean anything negative. It's a statement of describing it. When it comes to Bina, on the other hand, which is Maven Dover Metech Dover, understanding things and extrapolating one idea from the next, similar to multitasking, there she has more Bina than a man does. That's on a very basic Nigla Dika sense. As a matter of fact, to take it even a step further, there's statistics today. This could have been a great essay. I hope maybe somebody wrote about it, maybe in the future. There's statistics that show when it comes to, God forbid, autism, for some reason, many more men than women. Some say 2-to-1 ratio, some say 16-to-1. Obviously, the studies are incomplete, but there's no question that more men are diagnosed with autism. So there are those that say it because men are diagnosed, because diagnosis is easier to do by men than women. Women can masquerade it more. Their social lives are more social than men, and so on. But even that, why they're talking more social? Others explain that it's not a difference between a man's mind and a woman's mind. That a man is women are more verbal related. A man is more spatial and visual related. Again, much more defined by a particular definition as opposed to a verbal social communication, which is far more flexible and far less focused and fixated on one thing, which is very much what daas is about, is kashrus. There are also theories that go that men are more what they call technical, systematic, systemized, and women are more empathetic. Empathy, again, goes into the world of Bina, and you could say systematic is far more daas. And I can go on and on. So based on that, which is stronger, which is weaker, each has their quality. Autism is a fixation type of thing, and it could be a distorted form of daas. You have daaton kala and you don't mind that much, you're not that fixated, the disease may not affect. So here's a Maimer Chazal that could maybe even be the opening of a whole medical research. And if we just dismissed it and say, it's some primitive thought about women being inferior, look how distorted that can be. That's the pure nigla of the matter. When you look at the Kabbalah and Chassidus, the whole thing is radically different. So let's start with the Kisvei Arizal. The Kisvei Arizal, which is in Eitz Chaim, Shar HaKlolim, chapter 7, and Shar Leidas Hamechin, end of chapter 2. So there he says, why does it say Kala? He says Kala is the letters Kal Hey. Hey goes on the Hey Gvuris, that on daas, a full daas has Hey Chsadim and Hey Gvuris. Because it's a meir that divides into two, which is why the mechin of Gvuris and the mechin of Chsadim. That's why it comes after that, come the Midas. But it's still, in a woman, the reigns is Hey Gvuris. Hey Gvuris, so he says, the Hey Gvuris, the Hey is also Shem Havaya. 5 times Shem Havaya, he says Gematria 130. So suddenly the word Kal is becoming 5 times Shem Havaya. I would not suggest that that's something negative. And he explains there that she gets the daas, the chsadim she gets from her husband. Just like Bina is something a woman gets from a man. I'm sorry, that a man gets from a woman. A husband gets from his wife. That's one thing. That's the Eitz Chaim. In another place, in Eitz Chaim, he also says Kal is the gematria of Ab and Sag. Ab and Sag are 2 different permutations of Yud Kei Vav Kei. Can be with Mili Yudin, it's 72. In Milui Heyin, it's Samar Gimel. 72 and 63 is 135. So there you have another Shemus Havaya. Yeah. And there's more about it there as well. In Chassidus, it talks about it in a few places. Pirush HaMilas from the Mittler Rebbe, Perek Lamed Beis, talks about it, where there he says that the daas is easy to change by a woman more than by a man. You could change her mind from lav to hein, and not necessarily means it in a negative way. But through her yichud, with Zoh, with the masculine, she's able to have both. And he explains that that's also Ner Shabbos. Ner is gematria, he says there, 25 times 10. That's Ner. Ner is 250. Right? Yeah, 250. And he says that's the connection. Adam Yoda is Chava. That's Ner Shabbos, 250. The Ner, which is a 10 times Chafei. That's a tikkun for this element of Kuf Lamed, which is the 130, as I said, is 5 times 26. Okay. Then there's also, let me see, what else do I have here? Siddur, the Siddur. There's actually in Chassidus, you could find there little contradictions a bit. In the Siddur, Shara Krishma 84, Pei Dalet, Daf Pei Omid Dalet, he says, there it seems like it's like somewhat different than the Pirush Mishnayos. There he says, she could not accept different type of approaches. Daas allows you to see Chesed, Gvura, and so on. Daas, daaton Kala, refers to a complete focus. And there he sees a Mal Yusuf that's compared to Neshamas Yisrael, they only have Leiv Echad L'Shamayim. It's complete focus to the Eibishter. It seems like somewhat different than the Pirush Mishnayos, and also hard to understand how you can reconcile that with the Gemaras that I mentioned. But he says that very clearly there. So if anybody has any thoughts how to reconcile that Siddur with the Pirush Mishnayos and with the Gemara, I would love to see. Love to hear from you. You could perhaps connect it, I see in Teres Chaim and Tetzav in the Maimer Vasisa Tzitz, Tov Kuf Samach Aleph, that would be 560, page 560a. He discusses there that because of the Skashrus and the Hargosha, but there he qualifies, it says even women who daaton kalas, nevertheless, they have a very strong hiskashrus, strong connection in the kav that they are connected to. So it could be that there is a point where the women have a certain connection when it comes to a certain thing they're committed to, and yet there's also a part of them that's able to generally be able to see things in different perspectives. Not positive how to explain it, I'm just sharing the Maramikemis. And finally, I want to quote Imre Bina Shara Krishma, chapter 73, where similar to the Pirush HaMilas. Okay, so what we see from all this, the Chassidus has a lot to say on this topic, and it's a very fascinating sugya. I'm just giving some of the highlights, and hopefully people can develop it further. But here he takes something which seems so negative, and it turns into such a positive element. At the same time, it's true, there is an element of daaton kala that can be seen as not a positive. But it's not about negative and positive, it's about roles that we play, and we need to have both. We need to have people who have strong in bina and people strong in daas. Interesting, when it comes to chachma, you don't really have even though it says chachmas noshim bonsa besa, so you see chachma by them, but you also see chachma by men. So maybe chachma, there is an equality, maybe because it's the nekuda, krecharia, hisamtus, Hanochos HaSeichel, the resonance of intelligence, but that should be left for another discussion. As far as other details, I'll leave it for part 2 in this discussion. I'm sure there'll be comments and we'll be able to review more. I didn't cover the property issue, which I definitely will discuss. And let's move on to another topic. Okay. Some follow-up. Let's do first follow-up on the 12 steps. Chassidus on the 12 steps in the previous episode. Shekayach for the videos. A few things. Addictions should be seen and treated as pekuach nefesh, which means a threat to life, because they are. Very important. That's a very important point he's making. Number 2, there are tens, including myself, of Chassidic people, anash and shluchim, in 12-step programs that can help someone in recovery deal with kiyum hamitzvahs and how it fits with Chassidus, etc. So if anyone has a challenge in that regard, he says there are people who are dealing with this and can able to help someone in recovery deal with the issues of their commitment to mitzvahs and how it's consistent with Chassidus. Now, since you didn't, I don't know if you gave your contact information. If you don't mind, if you're listening to this, please leave some contact information, even if it's some anonymous email. So someone does write to us and asks, how could they contact you? I can give them some contact information. That's my request. So where do you do that? This is a good opportunity before I read on. meaningfullife.com/MyLife is a anonymous forum. If If you could leave some email address or some contact information so people who want to reach out and discuss it can do that. Good. Number 3, in the 12 steps we say, I am powerless over my addiction, but that's the only thing we are powerless over. Everything else you have power. And addiction is a disease. It's like having cancer. You are powerless over cancer. Okay. Fine. I accept your comments and thank you. They complement what we discussed. Another writer writes, clarification on addiction. Hello, Rabbi Jacobson. Thanks for reading my question last week about the 12-step program. I wasn't sure if I should elaborate, but I will now. I was specifically talking about someone going to a SA meeting with a heavy sexual addiction. So my question once again really goes like this. May a person even entertain such a thought about being powerless over such a terrible addiction, as it is clearly a serious transgression of the Torah commandments? And in general, the word addiction is defined as something uncontrollable. Isn't that contradictory to what we believe in? As you said, only asks of us what we are able to do. I don't think we have words like addiction in our holy teachings. Am I right about this? Is it really just a made-up idea by people who are excusing inappropriate behavior? I know people who will hate me for even suggesting such a thing, but I really do want to know if the Torah acknowledges any impulse as being uncontrollable. Thanks for letting me clarify. I think the first writer answers your question. It comes down to this. Yes, there's no question that our Pekudei would not ask us to do something that we're not able to do. That means we have full control. But there's a concept where a person begins doing something which they could have control over. Like he says in Tanya and Pekudei, Moyach Shalat Alev is a natural thing, that we are capable of control, as he spells it out. If you have an inappropriate thought comes to your mind, ahirur, aveda, that's inadvertent, you can't control that. That is uncontrollable. But you can control whether you continue dwelling on this thought, and from hirur it becomes machshava, something that you are deliberately thinking about. That you have control over. Very clearly states it. And that means you can push it away, as he says, Masir Daite, push it away, push it away with both arms, obviously figuratively, and think about something else, especially something in Kedusha and holiness. That's in our control, very clear. But let's say, God forbid, a person hasn't done that, and they allowed themselves to dwell on it, and they allowed themselves even to, God forbid, act on it, and think about it again, and it becomes an obsession, then that can turn into an addiction, where yes, now you may not be able to get out of this quagmire so easily. So the etzem inyan definitely was in your control. Nobody's born an addict. The Torah would never tell us you can't do something you're incapable of controlling. But you have now brought it upon yourself. Now you've brought it to a situation, you've become dependent on it. Can you will it away? Try your best. If you can, then we're all happy. But one of the ways you go to heal it, and that's why the Torah still tells you can heal, is we sometimes need a doctor. Like the other writer writes, sometimes it becomes like an illness. Did it come born with it? No. But you've brought it, like as the Shalah says. All Vedas are with the Yetzer Hara, but there's some Vedas you would never have thought of doing. You instigated your Yetzer Hara, you allowed it to take over, you invited it in, so to speak. And human actions can create real problems. We can dig a big hole for ourselves. That's also a Torah truth. So whether the Torah uses the word addiction or not, but it definitely uses, it can become something that was once just a choice of Veda, has now become an addiction, something that you have become a habit for you. And this may require more than just willpower and just not doing what God doesn't want you to do. Because Varaya, if you couldn't stop yourself because God said don't do it the first time, now you're doing it so many times it's become a habit, now it's going to be easy to follow God. You allowed that to become, God forbid, I'm not saying in an accusatory way, I'm just pointing out the point here. So now you may need to have different methods, medical methods, medication, even, or other things that will help a person get out of that habit they now have gotten trapped into. If you can develop such a rotzen that you couldn't develop in the first time of stopping that thought to come into your mind and stop yourself, as I said, God bless you. So the answer is both. You have control, but that control that you had, could have given up by allowing yourself to become a slave to your own self, which is maybe the Hera, what we learn about Eved Ivri, that you have now become comfortable being a slave. Eved Lavodim. And that's a problem. Here the Eved Lavodim is you become a slave to your own desires or passions or addictions. So that's my response to that. There are more questions on this topic, but as I said, we'll have to continue because I want to cover more ground. So let me go now to a follow-up on, what's the next follow-up here? On Hanochos, the Sichos. Let me find it. Just give me a moment. Here we are. So in episodes 103 and 105, we talked about my work. I talked about my work in the Fabrengens and Hanochos. And the questioners and some others seem to be asking that I wasn't clear 100% about how much you could be medayik, how much you can emphasize in the sichos that the Rebbe edited and the footnotes. Someone referring to a sich in Vayechi Tovshim Amalef that the Rebbe said he's not Magia the Mara Mekemis. He's asking me if there's context which would like to clarify what the Sikha means, because on its face, it seems that we should not be medayik in the Mara Mekemis generally. Another question, I don't think you answered the question of how far one can be medayik. Again, emphasize. And precision of everything. I would point out the Rebbe himself is medayik unbelievably in the Sikhs of the Frierdiker Rebbe. For example, the Sikh on Shabbos Mevarchim El. So the fact that one can be medayik is clear that you can, but the only catch is who and how. So for that we have the klal from the Rabbeim that if it'll add in Yerushalayim, okay. Which means what he said, the Rebbe Rashab, he didn't like people saying commentaries on Tanya, but if it adds in Yerushalayim, fine. No, I would say the following. And I think I did state it clearly, but I'll reiterate it, and I have no issue doing that. First of all, remember, all these Hanochos are the Rebbe's Fabrengens. The Rebbe spoke. Let's, for argument's sake, say, God forbid, it was not written down, but you hear it on a tape. Can you be medayik on what you hear on the tape? The Rebbe's own mouth speaking. Of course you can. You may not understand everything. That's why when we wrote it down, we tried our best, and shkiyas mi yovin, but to go with an attitude, can you be medayik, the other way around. If there's something that's troublesome, or you may see that this needs explanation, you go to Arav, you go to Mashpi, you go to the Maniach and say, is this exactly? You check it out. But overall, this is what the Rebbe said. When the Rebbe's magiyat, it gives it more than that. It's a shtempel. The Rebbe edited. He edited, he added, he subtracted, he crossed out things. He did this all the way through Tafshin and Beis. There's somewhat of distorted attitude out there, which I think is political, and that's why I'm so adamant, that people are starting to question whether these sichos were written by were conceived by the manichim. Did they add things? Never, God forbid. I said the Rebbe's name is on them. The Rebbe edited. He edited. If he added one word or he added 1,000 words, it makes no difference. On the contrary, sometimes the Rebbe editing more was because it wasn't written well. It went, the Rebbe looked at it, he edited. If he left one line and crossed out another line, what does that tell you? That the first line he didn't cross out, very deliberately. Achman al-Itzlan, to start challenging and questioning. This has nothing to do with me being a maniach. This has to do with the Rebbe's integrity here. Someone suggested that I'm a negei b'davar. Of course I'm going to say, no, I'm not negei b'davar in this context. I'll tell you, I'm a negei b'davar the other way around. Because I'm constantly afraid that I made a mistake. It's a big achrayus to do this. Obviously I'm a negei b'davar. I wrote something, I try to be as honest as possible about it. But to make such a suggestion, I find that it's couching in some subtle way. People are finding ways, I don't have to take the sikha so seriously. Mashiach, it was written, maybe the manichim added it. That's the maskana. Just like the vart about learning Tanya and coming out Yerushalayim, even if the pshat is not so accurate, I see here the other way around. By making the sichas weaker, and it comes a way that you have less Yerushalayim and you have less diuk of the Rebbe's kavanah, I see it as being resulting in something which is not appropriate, which tells me that maybe it's not coming from good motives. I'm not challenging everybody that's asking these questions. I'm just throwing that out since we're on the topic. So absolutely, the Rebbe's magi, you could be medayik mamish. If the Rebbe edited again, would he add things? So what? What's the contradiction? As I mentioned, there's a Madura Kam of Tanya, Madura Tanya. I think that Mashpiim, Rabbonim, leaders, quote unquote, and others who have fed this myth that not all sichos are bediyuk, especially in the later years, have done a terrible crime and injustice. Because where do you draw the line? Someone told me, the Maimer Basel Agani Tavshin Yud Aleph, the Rebbe said it in Tavshin Yud Aleph. Who says we're in the Deir HaShvi anymore? It's a good question. If you're starting to question, okay, there you can hear it on tape, fine. But there are hundreds of sichos. If you start going with that type of attitude, you can go back to the Gemara, the Sheinim and Achreinim, all say they wrote about it in a certain time, certain conditions. How do we know exactly the Shas was exactly every word? Maybe the word is a little different. I don't want to share where this can go. The Rebbe's sichos that are were muge by the Rebbe, and period. Someone said to me, what about the Rebbe sometimes made a check? First of all, for the record, I never got a sikh where it was just a check. A check to me would mean that the Rebbe said you could publish it. I don't know if it means it's muge. I don't know if you could publish it muge. It's no different than a Hanochos built in muge. I don't know. I don't know what the Rebbe did. But a sikh the Rebbe edited, put his pencil on it or pen, and edited it is edited. There's sikh the Rebbe edited only partially. We know clearly till Sif Hey, till Sif Yud, whatever. So that's what we write, muge till there. Do you know how many Hanochos the Rebbe edited that people don't know? The Rebbe edited pieces. But it wasn't the whole sikh, so we left it in a context of a Hanochos built in muge. So Hanochos built in muge is exactly as its name implies. It's built in muge, it's not edited by the Rebbe, and therefore there can be many mistakes. Many, I don't know many, but there could be mistakes. A muge is muge. Now, as far as microcosms go, of course the Rebbe relied. It's like saying, maybe he went to the printing press, and the printing press, by mistake, printed page 2 before they printed page 1. Obviously, the Rebbe didn't edit that. He relied that there would be printers. He relied there'd be copy editors. There are sikhs, by the way, that we edited and later found that it was a mistake. We didn't read the Rebbe's words correctly. Of course, the Rebbe can't take a chrayas on that because that was our problem. As Maram came is the Rebbe relied. I don't know if the Rebbe went and looked up every posuk and every ma'amachal. He relied that we would write. But I will tell you a few times. I remember once a Shvili Amuna, the Rebbe circled and wrote, "Is this accurate?" And we went and looked up. It was takanat. It was a tosat fus. There were times the Rebbe pointed out, but generally speaking, common things. Or did the Rebbe go look up and use his Ruach HaKodesh or his Bekiyas B'Shas when we quoted a Maimer Chazal? Sometimes the Rebbe would note, sometimes not. That doesn't mean the sikh is not muge. It means that the Rebbe did rely on basic things. Bereshis, Aleph. If there was a typo and the Rebbe didn't catch the typo, that means the typo is right. It means that the Rebbe relied, obviously, on the human in the human element here. But to suggest that the sikh and its details are in any way somewhat man-made by us, God forbid. And I say it again and again, and it won't change based on people's hearsay. I talk from the inside. I worked in the sikhs. I say it with a full takeoff. And the sikhs could be medayik in them, and medayik, just like you medayik in every vart in Torah. Bilti mugi could also be medayik. But there, with the qualification that a maniach wrote it, and the Rebbe not necessarily gave his stamp on it, and so on. But it's still a hanocha of the Rebbe's Fabrein. Okay. Now, another follow-up, which is resignation ever acceptable? Should I relay positive feedback and affirmation to a friend when I honestly don't believe what I'm saying? Which is also connected to the Chassidic approach to Yush. Is it ever called for? You'll see the connection in the letter. Hello, Rabbi Jacobson. I have a friend who considers me more mentor than friend. Let me just organize myself here. Okay. I have a friend who considers me more a mentor than a friend. She has been through a lot, broken engagements, 2 divorces, and a strong physical disability. I don't like talking negatively about anyone, but I must say that she also has a strong temper and can very often be quite difficult. As a good friend, I always try to sound positive, showing that I believe in her and that I believe that she can and will, with God's help, get married again to a kind and caring person who will brighten her life. My question is, am I being dishonest? Quite a few people have already told her that maybe she should stop obsessing over getting married, as it may not even be the right thing or may not be realistic. She gets so offended when hearing that it's scary. She has actually severed ties with quite a few acquaintances, friends, family members for doing so. I myself happen to believe that they are right. I obviously do not run this world and have no idea what God's plan is. But for the time being, as well as the way her pattern of life has been up till now, and let me now not mention that she is close to 50 years old, I frankly am not sure if she's capable of getting married. The problem is, as I'm sure you assume on your own by now, that she's totally not ready to hear that, or even consider the fact that for the time being, she's just not up to it. So it really boils down to this. I feel that my encouragement is all just to save face and not have her be upset at me. So for starters, I feel like I'm doing something dishonest. And besides that, maybe her hopes are remaining high only because of my words of encouragement, which can, in the end, result actually being a misjustice to her, an injustice to her, as it is not letting her be open to reality. Then again, I'm not really sure the other way is better. In general, it's hard to believe that the Torah would tell us to encourage a person to give up. Please tell me what the approach of the Rebbe would be in such a case, both in regard to understanding what is reasonable and what to be hopeful for, and in regard to how to convey the proper message as well. I understand that you do not know the details of the story, but I do hope you'll be able to answer me based on what I described. Okay. Yeah. Well, let's take the Rebbe's approach. The concept of yush is absolutely unacceptable at any time, which means giving up. As long as a person is blessed by Hashem to be in this world, even if they have their challenges and handicaps or whatever you want to call it, they have the ability, they have a soul, a divine soul, to overcome any challenge and fulfill what God wants. What God wants of us, we don't know. But we have to make every attempt possible, whether it's marriage, whether it's building a healthy life, whether it's being committed to different good projects, doing a shlichus, teaching, educating, inspiring, motivating others. So I don't know this woman, but I would say, as a friend, you are absolutely not just optional, but obligated to inspire her. But I would widen the repertoire. Marriage, I would not take off the table, because you never know. You never know. How are we to say what God's plan is as you write? But I would widen the repertoire. Meanwhile, she should be involved in other things. Try to find suggested, productive, constructive things she can do that will make her good or feel good about herself. And fulfill her shlichus, because she has a shlichus. Do we believe that? Absolutely. Let's start with that. Whether the shlichus will manifest in finding the right guy, right marriage, that way to be seen. That's up to God, but you have to make the effort. And above all, make the effort, as I said, in other things. What is she doing tomorrow, next day? Good friends should help her find a path that she's involved in, that's positive things, while also working on finding a shidduch or letting people know. Is it more difficult for a 50-year-old woman, especially divorced with the challenges? Of course it's difficult, but that's life. Life is difficult. So the attitude has to be a truthful one. You believe in her neshama, you believe in her soul, you believe that God gave her a mission of shlichus. You find out what keches strengths she has. She definitely has some strengths and qualities. And help cultivate that, help push her. That's honest. As far as marriage goes, you may not know or feel confident that that's the way to go. So fine, so you don't have to be involved in the shidduchim process. But there's no reason to be negative either, because how do you know? We don't know. And with that type of attitude, it's not only with her, with others as well. So the Rebbe's approach generally is always completely positive. Challenges are opportunities. And that's how I would approach this whole thing, in an honest, positive way, encouraging, inspiring, motivating, and finding things the way she can express herself in that fashion. Okay. Let's see, where are we? I was going to do one more thing in Tanya Perek Test, 2 more questions. Let's go to the Chassidus question, and I'll just do the others in the following weeks. So I apologize not covering certain topics that have been announced, but that's an opportunity for us to revisit each other and see each other. An opportunity for you to come and tune in the coming weeks. Let the question of Chassidus. The Chassidus question is an interesting question, so let's get to that. Chassidus explains Tzimtzum with the analogy of a teacher condensing an idea so that he can convey it to his student. So too Hashem condensed his divine light so that it would be less intense and allow existence to manifest. It seems to me that Tzimtzum condensation in our physical world does not mirror the spiritual Tzimtzum. Squeezing or condensing an object in our physical world causes it to become denser, thicker, heavier, stronger, more intense. Whereas the divine Tzimtzum condensed the light in order to make it less dense and intense. The physical world is a mirror of the spiritual world. So why does it seem to be the opposite in this case? Very good question, and it really gets us back to the, as I say always, to the root of the issue, which is, what does Tzimtzum mean? So as we know, lo yoda me'inyan Tzimtzum, haramak lo yoda me'inyan Tzimtzum. The Rebbe Rashab, the Tzemach Tzedek actually writes, and the Rebbe Rashab brings it in several different places. And the Chiddush of the Tzimtzum is the Chiddush say that Tzimtzum of the Arizal. Even though there are hints to it in Zohar, and in one place the Tzemach Tzedek actually writes that it was known before, but that's for another discussion. What does the word Tzimtzum mean? So many people translate, as you said, condensing, contracting, concentrating. Tzimtzum, l'tzamtzum, like l'kametz, from the word kmitza. But Tzimtzum is also, you find, translated as helam. Or I should go the other way order. Siluk, removal. Siluk atzme. God removed his divine light. Sometimes the word is helam, concealed. So what is the word? Is it removal? Is it concealment? Is it condensing? That's the way the question should be posed. And when you answer that question, you'll have the clarity here. So what is Taka the Nekuda? Let's go to the original. So in the beginning of three main Sfarim that the Rachav, Reb Chaim Vital, wrote from the Arizal, where the Tzimtzum is first documented, you have the Eitz Chaim, you have Eitzus Chaim, and you have Movish Yarim. The three different works that all come from Rabbi Chaim Vital Arizal. And they say basically the same idea. So I'm going to read the actual Lashon, and then I'll refer to some Aramikamis and sources, and we'll discuss it briefly as time allows. So he says the following. He says like this. Before all the emanations emanated, and all the creatures were created, Eir Elyon Pashut, there was a seamless, simple light, which is the infinite divine light. He calls that Eir Ein Sof, filled all of reality, meaning the reality that would become reality. And there was no room for anything but that divine consciousness. And there was no begin. There was no ma'ila, mata, no reish, no safe. Everything was b'hashva, all unanimity, I would say, seamless. V'hu hanikra eir ein sof. That's called eir ein sof. Then, when the rose in God's desire, but it's saying aposha to create the worlds and to emanate the emanations, that means Atzilus and Bria and Bia. He says, what did he do? Tzimtzum es atzme ein sof b'nekuda hamtsois. You could say here, I'm going to say he concealed himself in a nekuda hamtsois, in a central point. Asher boy be'emtzu, that's there in the middle. And the commentaries explain middle meaning what would be later the middle. And he removed the light and pushed it to the sides. So you have the expression silik atzmei latzad and other expressions like that. The Alter Rebbe makes it very clear in Tanya Shayach Ramuna Perek Zayin that the word siluk is not chaz v'shalom literal. Simson kipshute. It doesn't mean literal, it means concealment. Selam v'loy siluk. In addition, that it's not obviously in atzmos, it's in the light, it's in the energy, in the divine consciousness that existed. So the word condensing is not yet, it doesn't seem to apply here. It's concealment. On the contrary, he left nothing remained. Because if something would remain, Chassidus explains what he says in Eitz Chaim. He asks later the question, why didn't God make it in a way, Hashem make it in a way that he just removed enough and left the kav? Because a kav would later enter this space. Later again, conceptual time later. So why didn't he just remove that? Because it wouldn't leave room for existence. So you needed a complete helam and siluk, which allows some to interpret incorrectly, as the Alter Rebbe says, tzimtzum k'pshute. If there was something condensed, it's not tzimtzum k'pshute. It's not literal. There's something there. And yet he says, Nekuda Hamtsois, which remains somewhat unclear what that means. So you have in Chassidus does bring that from other places in the Kisvei Arizal, that there did remain something. It was called a reshimu. Reshimu can mean impression, it can mean residue, it can mean a reshima, like something left over. Something was left over. Which would be the esis harashimu, the letters of the reshima that become the root of what would later be the containers. And in some places it explains that reshima is a form of condensation. In Shar HaYichud, and let me give you a few sources here. In Shar HaYichud, well, let's start with Likutei Torah. In the addition, L'Koven Inya Mashakosar B'Eitzes Chaim, Likutei Torah, some of the other Svarim weren't always there, so he said, the end of Hisofis to Vayikra on Likutei Torah, he speaks about this. As well as Shar HaYichud from the Mittler Rebbe, chapter 12 and on. And in Acholzu, Tafresh Nun Tes, you have number one, Ha'orah from the Rebbe, very fascinating order. Let's see what page it's on. On page Ayin Zayin, the new editions, page 77, where he says the words that loy nisher rak reishim ha'er harishim. The only thing remained was a reishim. Now, the Rishimu could be explained, as he says in Shai Yuchid, as a form of condensing, that the teacher condenses the idea. But that's not a contradiction to the Tzimtzum. As he explains that later, that mushal is not adequate, he says clearly, because nothing remained. You can't say any gili remained. Condensing would mean that the teacher, instead of having the whole full-blown idea, he's condensed it to a nukudas atamtsis, a brief point. But that would still not be the Tzimtzum Arishin. So he says there, that's why he gives other examples for the Rishimu, one of them being like a luach, like someone making, like architects that make a marking, like a blueprint, just a type of very, like a trace of something, which is another meaning for Rishima. But the bottom line is that you have to look at Tzimtzum in several ways. And there's a Maimer Ponim Tafresh Nun Tes as well, where he makes it very clear. There's an element of Tzimtzum that's for sure an element of complete Siluk and Helam, complete. Chassidus usually explains the Eir HaBligvul was completely, nothing remains from that in any conscious, revealed way. Then there's the Tzimtzum and the Eir Sherish of the Eir HaGvul, like in the 10 hidden spheres, and that in Ayin Beis explains it can be takasina as miut. It's a diminishing. But it does completely conceal it, but it's a diminishing. Not siluk, not complete, so diminishing. Can that be explained like a condensing? Maybe. And then there's another thing, that the Tzimtzum left, even if everything else was concealed, it left something that can be seen as the beginning of something that would later develop. At that point, not necessarily it's a condensing. The bottom line is that this translation is not necessarily accurate, the word condensing. I'm just qualifying that there could be a dimension. The Shima, that's something. Now remember that the Shimu, it says that Reb Marash's Chiddush, that the Tzimtzum, the Shima, the letters of the Shima were not affected by the Tzimtzum. However, that's explained. And it's explained by the Reb Marash and by the Rebbe Rashab as well in several places, including Ayin Beis. But regardless, even if the Tzimtzum didn't affect it, doesn't mean there's any revelation. It means the letters themselves were not affected. But the Eir in the letters, the content, is there. So it's like seeing letters that don't necessarily. So from the point of view of the Mashpia, you could say he sees the idea even in those so-called dark letters. But from the point of view of the Makabel, the recipient, until the Kav doesn't come and shine into those Kalim, into those letters, there's no revelation. So it could be it's a form of condensing from the point of view of Mamayl Lamata, from the Mashpia, but not from the point of view from the student. So that somewhat broadens the topic, and I hope I answered the question, and be happy to discuss further. I want to add one more thing, which I forgot to mention with the women, Noshim Daitan Kala, fascinating piece from the Tzemach Tzedek. In Eira Teira Shira Shirim, the page is 467 and 468. He actually says that he asked the question about Bina Yisera, and he says that Chacham Adav Minovi, Chacham would be like Bina Yisera and Itna Beisha, she has more Bina, so she understands more. But when it comes to Nevuah, which is a Riyah, which is, you can say is daas, is a concentrated Riyah and sight and a vision, Chacham, a Navi has that, and a Chacham doesn't have, but a Chacham is Adav Minovi. So that's an interesting footnote I wanted to add that really belongs earlier in this episode. Let's conclude with the essays. As you know, the new essay contest has concluded, and the judges are in full throttle looking at the essays. I hear very good comments and feedback. So you will hear more about it. But meanwhile, we're still continuing the essays from last year. That's how many there were. And so we do 3 essays. Let's start with the first one. When Myself is in Control by Rabbi Yaakov Wagner, 39, age 39, a teacher at Rabbinical College of America, Morristown, New Jersey. So as a teacher of Chassidus, he begins and says, a challenge he faces every morning when he enters his classroom is to think of ways to make the Chassidic discourse I'm about to teach readable, relatable, and applicable to my students. Young men from various backgrounds, many of whom are being exposed to the teaching of Chassidus for the first time. Some are apparent, the Chassidus, and some need more efforts, he says, to make them applicable. One example, he uses the Maimer Basel Legani, iconic in our generation, Basel Legani Tovshin Yud. Part of the discourse have an obvious impact with clear lessons in our life, but the central statement, a quote from the Zohar, which forms the basis of its development, can remain somewhat aloof. And he takes the Kad Iskafi Sitra Achre, Istalik Ikara Kutchebrichu B'Kula Alman, that through iskafia, by a person refraining, literally iskafia means to bend, to refrain themselves from doing something unholy, inappropriate, that draws down a transcendent energy, which is a theme that goes through the whole Hemshech. And he explains it in a very beautiful way. What is mamala? What is seviv in practical terms? And he uses actually a very interesting example. I've never heard this before, of a puppeteer, explaining the world in the context of a puppeteer, where either you see completely only the puppet, and you don't see, which is asiya, you don't see the hand, the puppeteer behind it, and you could think it's self-animated. A higher level Yitzira would be where the puppeteer's hand is visible. Abriya would be a transparent puppet, and Atzilus, there's only a hand. There's no puppet altogether. There's only the puppeteer. But all this is still mamala klamen. And sevu klamen, he says, is where you realize, what does he say? The deeper identity. The Eibishter is even higher. God is even higher than being a puppeteer. The personality is not even a puppeteer. It transcends it all. And that, to reach that level, requires some shift from us, and that's iskafia. It's well worth reading this essay, and how when we go and we challenge the iskafia, the outer shell, and ignoring its deeper identity, thus expelling Hashem's presence, when we break through our own surface level, that reveals the Hashem divine higher presence. And in his concluding words, he writes, self-control becomes easier when instead of controlling myself, it means giving myself control. Well stated. So the full essay can be read at meaningfullife.com/essays. Well done, and I commend you for that. The next essay. The next essay is Transforming Fear into Goodness by Moses Weisberg, age 32, Synagogue Beth-El, Panama. Very good. Panama. And this one deals with fear. This essay is about how to deal with fear. The basic idea is that we fear things that we can't handle. The reason we can't handle certain things is that our human tools are too limited to deal with them. The Chassidic solution is that when something is beyond our vessel, we have to attain the level called ayin, which is not defined by anything and can create harmony between two opposites, allowing a greater light to fit inside a small vessel. And basically it goes into the discussion of Edis and Kalim, that when they don't fit each other, the Kalim are overwhelmed by the Edis. The containers are overwhelmed by the energies. And he explains this both in the context of what is evil, is an energy that is not manifesting in any direct way, in any balanced way. Then he also emphasizes the same with fear. A human response generally by sensing the possibility of facing something new, unfamiliar, uncertain. And that's what generates fear. And also pain. When the light is greater than the vessel, it leads to pain. That's why birthing is so painful, because it's leading to a new emerging in a very small place of a new entity. So what's the solution? Chassidus offers the root of the problem is that the vessel is too small to contain and internalize the greater divine light. So the only way to fix it is by nullifying the vessel. This is the concept of bittul, self-nullification. And he says, the contrast would be the secular world would tell us how to deal with fear. Tell yourself that you can handle it. And Chassidus would say, tell yourself I can't handle it. And you say, Me'ayin Yovei Ezri, like from Tehillim. From Ayin comes my Ezri. My Ayin usually means, where am I going to get power, strength from? You get it from, say it not as a question, but say it b'nechusa, as a statement. You get it from the Ayin, from the bittul. And you get it from the Ayin Aliki that gives you the power not to be afraid of fear, because you embrace an energy that's beyond you. It's a creative and interesting way to apply it to fear. Love to be able to see how this can be applied in real steps. So he does give steps at the end, step-by-step guide about how not to fear, and how to put yourself in a state of mind that allows you to get to that place of ayin that is able to conquer fears. By above all, surrendering and recognizing that it's beyond us. Okay, so that's essay number 2. And finally, essay number 3 is The Power of Our Thoughts by Menucha Azagui, age 19, Roar Beis Chai Academy, Palm Beach, Florida. Power of Our Thoughts. And here, basically, do you ever see yourself as part of a film where it's a violent war, dramatic movie, hilarious comedy, and they seem to relate to your life, your regular daily life? and basically trying to find a way to get beyond negative thoughts. So she does it a step-by-step process, taking Tanya as the basis, a step-by-step process, a three-step process actually, with details of how you push away negative thoughts. One is pushing it away with your two hands, and that basically is 3 steps that she mentions here: physically, spiritually, and emotionally, describing how you push away bad thoughts. Step number 2 is halos, elevating our thoughts into something on a higher level. And number 3, not to be sad or depressed about negative thoughts that come and distract you. On the contrary, to realize that the animal soul has upped with game, and that itself is the challenge. So, practical application of Tanya. And with that, we cover the essays. And with that, we conclude. Everyone should have a very freilich and a guten Chodesh Adar Sheni. Sheni as in the context of even greater joy, revealed joy, and a joy that both transforms the individual, Pekudei, as well as creates a higher synergy of simcha together. And we should be zeicher to simchas elam al reishim gula amitis v'ashlema. This has been MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 106. Until next Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. Everyone have a very blessed week. Thank you very much.